because, you know, he's a great producer. I mean, he's one of the people that inspired me to get involved in the game in the first place. But I didn't personally think that Vauxhall and I was as good as Your Arsenal. And for me, it was the beginning of what I saw, I guess, really as a kind of general decline of Morrissey's releases of albums throughout the 90s.
In January 1995, having decided against touring to promote Vauxhall, Morrissey released a new single, recorded after the album's completion, Boxers.
Originally it was intended as an EP. The 3 tracks that were on Boxers plus Sonny, we did them all in 4 days at Olympic Studios with the same lineup as Vauxhall, with Woody on drums.
Boxers charted poorly and was subsequently included on the compilation album World of Morrissey. Yet it provided the catalyst for Morrissey's first tour in 2 years.
We started in Glasgow at the Barrowlands, which was really good. I remember we'd started doing Shoplifters of the World Unite as an encore. We rarely got through the whole song because the stage would just be so invaded with people. And I remember doing it it was Motherwell, which was like the 2nd or maybe 3rd gig, and everybody had left the stage, and I was still on trying to play, thinking, where is everybody? And then I was grabbed and whisked away, and we sort of ran out, Hard Day's Night style, straight onto the bus and off down the road with people in hot pursuit. I think live, the songs were a little harder. They were quite stripped down because obviously you've got the basics of the arrangement. You've got the bass, drums, 2 guitars, so you don't have the luxury of, you know, the overdubbed parts. So it's quite raw, and you know, the nature of a live gig. You've got the buzz, the adrenaline, and everything. So yeah, I think it's a different experience to the records. Friends that had come to gigs that had not seen him before were always surprised at kind of how hard the gigs were and how loud he can sing, you know. I think they have listened to the records. I think it's going to be a slightly more tame night out, you know, but yeah, it was quite wild at times.
As soon as the tour was over, Morrissey and the band joined Lillywhite once more to begin work on a new album, the hard-edged Southpaw Grammar.
Again, we just work on songs instrumentally. I think it was more straightforward than Vauxhall. You know, it was less textured. It was, as I say, more rock, so had more of a live feel to it. Again, though, we'd do the backing tracks, get a drum performance, add the bass, then add guitars, and then voices, etc.
Following the change in direction instigated by the artwork for Boxers, Morrissey decided to return to the iconography of the Smiths, using found images to adorn the record covers. Lawrence Stevens was the man entrusted to make Morrissey's ideas a reality.
My first kind of introduction into the Morrissey world was to be told to meet him at his house in just off Regent's Park in London. I had to be there at 4 p.m, 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I don't know why I remembered it was a Tuesday. But if I was a minute early or a minute late, he wasn't going to open the door. It was really exact. And realising that after that, because people would just turn up at his door and knock on his door and shove poetry through his letterbox and leave letters for him and stuff, so he'd never open the door. So unless he'd arranged a specific time for you, he wasn't going to open the door. So when you hear that, you think that's really extreme and quite strange, but really it's not, because, you know, if he knows you're coming at 4 o'clock, he'll open the door at 4 o'clock. So I went down to meet him at the house and got there a bit early and waited outside, and was just about to walk up the path at 4 o'clock, and he opened the door for me. And I later found out that in the front window that he had in his house was a two-way glass, so he could see out. and you couldn't see in. So whoever was coming up the path or waiting for him, he knew exactly who they were, and he was either going to open the door or not. So I'm kind of standing there, and he opens the door and just sort of says, you know, he didn't really say anything actually. I just sort of walked in, and I had all these, ideas and inklings of information that I'd been told under my arm, and went in and just sat down and laid the stuff down on the kitchen table, basically, you know. So this is the actual image that Morrissey gave me to use for the front cover of the album sleeve for Southpaw Grammar, and it was a picture that he cut out of a boxing magazine called The Ring. I had no way of knowing what year it was because he didn't remember, so I had to trace it back to actually get permission to use that image on the front. Even now, I'm still not sure if we actually got permission to use it, but we went ahead and used it anyway. So what I would then do, I scanned that in and then worked on a series of visuals which Morrissey had requested that we use the RCA Victor logo on the front. So I worked on a series of visuals and presented these to him, and he would then choose the typeface and the layout that he preferred. What happens is that people say, I've got this image, isn't it great? And I found it here, and da-da-da-da. But with Morrissey, he said, look, this is the image. So the image wasn't up for discussion. You know, this was the image. If I said, well, I don't like that image, why don't we use that? I think he would have said, well, no, I'm giving you this image to use, you know. I really like the so-called strangeness of the Morrissey thing. You know, I remember when I went round to the house the first time, and I sat on the sofa, and then when I went back, the sofa had gone. It was just a bare room, and I said, oh, you know, are you moving your furniture? You know, what happened to your sofa? And he said to me, what sofa? So it's kind of like, well, and I remember speaking to David Joseph and Emma Hickey, who were RCA, and who was the press guy, and he'd go around there, and he said, oh yeah, he'd said there was a table in the room once, and we went back and the table was gone, and we said, oh, what happened to the table? And Morrissey said, what table? So it was a bit like he was enjoying playing games. You think he'd leave the room and have a giggle and come back in again, you know. So, but I quite like that. I like the idea of going into someone else's world, you know. This was the actual 12-inch vinyl album sleeve front cover that we used after we'd scanned the picture, and this was the finished product, basically. We used the RCA Victor logo on the front, and Morrissey was very adamant that we would use the existing old RCA logo, which actually wasn't existing at the time. So we had to do a lot of work in trying to trace that down. The company was now owned by BMG, which is a German company, which Morrissey wasn't very happy about. RCA Victor no longer existed as a company. So basically we found, it was a Lou Reed album that we actually scanned the RCA Victor logo off of, which I think Morrissey quite liked the idea of that, and then blew it up accordingly. And originally we were going to have it on the back, as it is on the back here. In a way, I think the fact that this no longer existed, and it was Radio Corporation of America of a past time, I think he quite liked the idea of that as well, you know.
With the Southpaw sleeve, Morrissey was returning to the imagery that had so uniquely characterised the Smiths. Figures from the rich cultural past of the 20th century, reimagined through a pop art lens. For his solo releases, he had previously turned his back on these icons and had instead attempted to become one himself.
I think it is fascinating that, in a way, the Smiths never existed, and you never really saw them as a group on their sleeves as such, you know, on the front. Whereas Morrissey's solo, that was very much all about him, and he could then unleash full vent to his ego. With a slight kind of undertone of him denying that, because he could always say, well, for many, many years you didn't really see me on the front of the sleeve, so, you know, it's not ego, it's almost as well as he'd become he'd become an icon like those icons, and I think it was fair enough in a way that he could then put his own picture on the sleeves, because that, you know, he'd become one of those icons. He'd got the